I never thought the words, "you're too emotional," could sting so sharply until they came from the man I had trusted with my heart for over a decade. He said it with a quiet certainty, as if my tears, my doubts, my fears were not mine to feel, but his to dismiss. That day, I felt a fracture inside me, small at first, almost imperceptible, but one that would eventually split my world in two. Welcome to her untold journey. If emotional, real life stories touch your heart, you're in the right place. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Your support keeps this journey alive. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday. I was standing in the kitchen, my fingers sticky from stirring sugar into the morning coffee, when he walked in. The smell of burnt toast still lingered in the air, the radio playing softly in the background. I had been trying to talk to him about something simple, a bill we needed to pay, a conversation I thought would be mundane. But the way he looked at me, with that thin, unreadable line across his mouth, told me he was already done listening. "You're overreacting," he said, brushing past me, the faint scent of his cologne trailing in his wake. "Just calm down." I froze. The coffee cup trembled in my hands. Calm down? When I had been trying to explain, carefully, respectfully, the anxiety gnawing at me, that was always his phrase, the hammer he used when my feelings became inconvenient. Over the years, it became a rhythm. I felt, he dismissed. I questioned, he minimized. I hurt, he blamed me for it. I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was the problem. Our house had always felt like a sanctuary, at least in the early years. Light spilled through the big bay windows in the mornings, painting the kitchen in gold, and our small backyard smelled of honeysuckle in the evenings. The creak of the old wooden floor in the hallway, the hum of the fridge, the soft tapping of his fingers against the table while he read the newspaper, these were ordinary, comforting sounds, or so I thought. Before everything unraveled, our life had a rhythm I could almost trust. I worked part-time at a local bookstore, the smell of paper and coffee comforting me as I shelved novels and helped customers find escape in stories. He had his own career, meticulous, structured, always precise. Our son, Daniel, was 7, curious and bright, and our weekends were often filled with pancake breakfasts, trips to the park, and evening board games, the kind where laughter echoed, and sometimes I thought nothing could touch us. But subtle cracks had begun to show. The way he would stare at his phone for longer than necessary, the sudden tension in his jaw when I asked him about his day, the extra hours at work that never really existed. I told myself it was normal. Everyone needed space. But deep down, a quiet unease had started to settle in my chest, a small drumbeat of worry I tried desperately to ignore. I remember the first truly unsettling moment. It was a Sunday morning, light filtering lazily through the curtains, Daniel playing with his blocks on the rug. I had asked him, gently, hesitantly, if he had plans for the evening. He stiffened. His eyes darted, almost imperceptibly, to the corner of the room, as if he had been caught in a lie he didn't even know how to tell. He said, "I have a meeting." Voice even, practiced, but something in his tone was off. My motherly intuition, the one that I had always trusted, whispered that there was more to it. I didn't press further. Not yet. I was careful. I had learned over the years that pressing too hard made my dramatic. That word haunted me in my mind like a ghost. Dinner that night was quiet. Daniel had asked for spaghetti, and I cooked with the usual attention to detail, the perfect sauce, the tender noodles, the sprinkle of Parmesan. But even as we ate, I noticed the way he picked at his food, the tension in his shoulders, and the glance he threw towards the hallway phone. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I bit my tongue, remembering how quickly our conversations could twist into arguments where I was always in the wrong. It wasn't just the words. it was the way he made me question my own reality. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed one night, the faint hum of the city outside our window, and saying quietly, "I feel like I can't trust what I see anymore." He laughed softly, almost pityingly. "See, that's exactly what I mean. You're imagining things. You're too emotional." And just like that, I started to shrink. Not physically, but in spirit. I stopped sharing little joys, little fears, little thoughts. My words felt dangerous, my feelings inconvenient. Over time, I became cautious, careful, walking on a floor that might collapse beneath me if I so much as raised my voice. Yet, in the quiet moments, I still held on to a small ember of hope. Perhaps one day he would see me, not the emotional woman he so often mocked, but the real me, with all my tenderness and flaws, with my love that had been unwavering. I clung to the belief that the warmth of our home, the laughter of our son, the life we had built together would shield me from the unease that gnawed at my heart. That ember was what kept me going, until the first message arrived. It was from a woman I had never met, her name simple, her words cautious. She wrote, "I think you should know the truth about him. I can't stay quiet anymore." I remember staring at the screen, the phone trembling in my hand, the faint smell of burnt toast from the morning still clinging to the air. My heart raced, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a spark of something else. Validation, perhaps, that my instincts hadn't failed me. I didn't know it then, but that message would be the beginning of everything unraveling. The facade he had maintained so carefully, the control he exerted so subtly, the narrative he had spun around my emotional instability. That single line would begin to dismantle years of manipulation and set me on a path I didn't know I was capable of walking, reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my truth. For a while, I tried to push the message from that unknown woman out of my mind. Life had a way of demanding my attention. Daniel's homework sprawled across the kitchen table, the laundry piling up, the steady rhythm of work at the bookstore. But every time I saw him, every time he smiled or sighed, the memory of that simple, urgent sentence lingered in the corners of my mind. "I think you should know the truth about him." At first, the unease was subtle. A glance at his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. A sudden change in plans with no explanation. A new tension that seemed to hum through the air. It was easy to dismiss. "I'm imagining it again," I told myself, echoing the words he had drilled into me so many times. Too emotional, overreacting, sensitive. Yet, the small things kept piling up. I remember one Thursday evening, just after dinner. Daniel had gone to his room to play, and I was washing the dishes, the warm water lapping at my hands, the scent of lemon soap filling the air. He leaned against the doorway, eyes fixed on me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Are you coming to the theater performance tomorrow?" I asked casually. Our community theater was putting on a small musical, and Daniel was excited to perform a short skit with his classmates. He shook his head. "Can't. Work stuff." It was the third time this week he had canceled plans, citing work emergencies. But something about the way he said it, so calm, so rehearsed, made my chest tighten. I felt that familiar tremor of anxiety, the one I had learned to suppress. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, neutral. "Yes, why wouldn't it be?" His eyes flicked toward the living room clock, then back to me, and something in that look made me pause. There was a subtle sharpness, a hidden edge, as if he had already decided the limits of what I could ask or know. I wanted to press, to demand honesty, but I didn't. Not yet. Years of being told I was too dramatic had trained me to bite my tongue, to swallow questions whole. So I nodded, letting the thought drift away, though it settled heavy in my chest. The next morning, I noticed another odd detail. His cologne lingered, rich, unfamiliar, and not one of his usual scents. On the bathroom counter, a strand of hair, softer than mine, brushing the edge of the sink. A fluster of panic rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, the ember of suspicion burned brighter. I started paying attention to patterns, small ones at first. Phone calls in hushed tones, sudden silences when I entered the room, computer screens closed too quickly. He had a way of making these moments feel like my fault, like I had misread the situation. I felt caught between doubt and fear, shame and instinct, like walking on a tightrope suspended over a pit I couldn't quite see. And then came the first real clue. It was a Saturday, and Daniel and I had gone to the park early in the morning. The air was crisp, the smell of wet leaves clinging to my jacket, the sound of children laughing in the distance. My phone buzzed with a message from that same unknown woman. He's lying. He's been lying for months. I'm scared, but you need to know. I froze on the park bench, my coffee sloshing in the cup, my hands trembling. Months. The word echoed in my mind. Every canceled dinner, every work emergency, every whispered excuse, it all began to form a pattern, a map of deceit, carefully plotted, painstakingly hidden. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to dismiss it. But deep down, I knew. My instincts had always been my compass, even when he tried to convince me they were broken. I had felt the subtle manipulations for years, the way he twisted arguments, the way he made me doubt my own memory, the way he painted me as unstable to friends and family, so that when I cried, they looked at me with sympathetic pity instead of outrage. That afternoon, I began noticing more odd details. His shoes were always slightly off-center when he returned home, as if he had been somewhere he shouldn't have been. The faint lipstick stain on a coffee cup I hadn't seen before. The smell of perfume that didn't belong to me. Every little thing was a thread in a tapestry I had been blind to, woven meticulously over time. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. Maybe he's just busy. Maybe I am too sensitive. But the woman's messages kept coming, careful, considerate, almost pleading. I didn't want to get involved, but he's dangerous in his manipulation. Please trust yourself. You deserve the truth. One evening, after Daniel was asleep, I confronted him. Not angrily, not with accusations, but with quiet questions that I hoped would invite honesty. I've noticed some things, I began softly, the faint hum of the streetlights outside casting long shadows in our living room. You're imagining things, he said again. You see ghosts where there are none. The words were like a knife wrapped in velvet, calm, polished, yet sharp enough to make me flinch. I wanted to argue, to throw evidence in his face, but I remembered the lessons he had drilled into me. Never overreact, stay calm. Too emotional. So I stayed silent, my chest tight, my mind racing, and the ember of suspicion growing into a small flame I could no longer ignore. That night I lay awake in bed, the ticking clock louder than usual, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I could trust my instincts, where my feelings were valid, where I wasn't too emotional for simply existing in a world that demanded explanation for every tear. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. And in that stillness, I realized something crucial. If I wanted the truth, if I wanted my life to stop being a carefully orchestrated performance, I would have to step into that fear. I would have to listen to that unknown woman, to follow the breadcrumbs wherever they led, even if it meant confronting everything I had built my life around. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet observation and sleepless nights. I started noticing the patterns that had once been invisible to me, the little lies, the sudden distractions, the way his voice changed when he thought no one was listening. It was exhausting, living in a house that felt like it had hidden rooms I couldn't enter. One evening, I came home from the bookstore to find the living room unusually silent. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I set down my bag, wringing my hands, my senses heightened. Daniel's toys were scattered in the corner as usual, but something felt wrong. Then I saw it. A small envelope on the kitchen counter, neatly folded, addressed in a handwriting I didn't recognize. My pulse jumped and a cold tremor ran down my spine. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photograph. It was him. Not the husband I thought I knew, the man I had kissed goodnight, the man who smiled at our son's antics, the man who told me I was his world. No, this was someone else entirely, a man laughing with another woman in a cafe, their hands brushing casually across the table, her face radiant and familiar. I recognized the warmth of familiarity. He had tried to hide her, tried to erase her existence from my life, but there she was. Proof. Undeniable. The envelope also contained a note, simple and urgent. I didn't want to involve myself, but you deserve the truth. Call me, please. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the counter, the cold surface pressing into my back, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the small, silent tears I had learned to stifle, but full, raw, shaking sobs that rattled my entire body. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. His lies had been meticulous. He had painted me as too emotional to everyone who mattered, a convenient scapegoat for his own deceit. Every argument I had lost, every dinner ruined, every quiet suspicion I had whispered in my own mind, it had all been orchestrated, a performance to protect his secret life. The following day, I hesitated, then dialed the number the woman had given me. Her voice was soft but firm when she answered, careful yet insistent. I didn't know how else to reach you. I can't stay in the shadows anymore. He's been lying, manipulating, controlling. You deserve the truth. And she told me everything. Months of meetings, whispered promises, stolen moments, how he had gaslighted me, twisted reality so I would doubt myself, how he had built two lives, one visible and polished, the other secret and reckless. She described the financial manipulations, the casual deceptions, even the subtle ways he had alienated me from friends who might have believed me if I had ever spoken. I listened, frozen and trembling. Every word confirmed what my heart had already feared. But hearing it aloud from someone who was outside the manipulation was a brutal, purifying experience. Pain cut deep, but clarity followed. I could finally see the web he had woven, and for the first time, I understood that it wasn't me who was too emotional. It was him who was dishonest, cunning, and selfish. That night, when he returned home from his work meeting, I confronted him, not with anger, not with hysteria, but with a quiet, unwavering strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I know, I said simply, my voice calm, almost eerie in its steadiness. He froze, the newspaper he had been holding slipping from his hands. "Know what?" he asked, masking the flicker of panic in his eyes with feigned confusion. I held the photograph in my hand, the image of them across the table, smiling, unashamed. I know about her. I know everything. He laughed, nervous, brittle, and hollow. "You're imagining things. You always imagine things." "No,"
I said, my hands steady, my chest open, my voice resonating with the truth I had reclaimed. I am not too emotional. I am human, and I deserve honesty. His defenses faltered. His voice, once steady and commanding, now trembled slightly as he stammered, searching for a lie, a diversion, a way to twist reality back to his control. But there was no escape. The truth had been delivered to me in unassailable fragments, each piece another nail in the coffin of his carefully curated deception. That night, I stayed awake longer than he did, replaying every moment of our past, every small manipulation, every slight, every word that had been used to erode my confidence. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt alert, alive, and aware. Because understanding the truth, as painful as it was, gave me something I had not had for years. Power. Not the kind that seeks revenge, not the kind that humiliates, but the quiet, unshakable power that comes from seeing clearly, knowing your worth, and reclaiming your own narrative.
The days that followed the confrontation were surreal. He moved around the house as if nothing had changed, but I could see it in the tilt of his head, the way his hands lingered a fraction too long on the counter, the quick, darting glances at me when he thought I wasn't watching. I no longer felt fear exactly, not the fear that once kept me quiet and compliant. I felt focus. I felt determination. I felt, for the first time in years, like I was awake. I started small. I took careful notes of everything I had discovered. The calls, the late nights, the subtle manipulations. I kept them hidden in a folder on my laptop, encrypted and private. I knew that one day these notes might be necessary, perhaps not for revenge, but for justice. I couldn't rely solely on my memory anymore. His denial could twist my recollections against me if I let it. I also began reaching out to people he had previously influenced, friends who had dismissed me, colleagues who had seen the perfect couple. I didn't confront them angrily, I simply shared pieces of the truth, cautiously and with tact. It was astonishing how many people nodded in understanding, as if they had sensed the cracks, but had been unsure how to interpret them. Some apologized quietly, others expressed shock. The tide was turning. Slowly, I realized that I had been isolated not by my own actions, but by his careful narrative. At home, I set boundaries. I spoke clearly and without hesitation. I made small decisions I had once deferred to him. What to cook, what errands to run, even how we would spend weekends with Daniel. He questioned me at first, the too emotional echoes in his tone, but I no longer faltered. I answered calmly, firmly. I am capable, I am clear, I am telling you what we are doing. One morning, I caught him on his phone again, the quick flick of his thumb and the way he silenced it too fast. My heart didn't race the way it used to. Instead, I noted it, filed it, waited. And then quietly, without confrontation, I texted the woman who had first reached out to me. I need to know everything you can share. Now. Her reply came within minutes, hesitant but detailed. Meetings, messages, even his attempts to manipulate her into silence. She admitted she had been afraid of his temper and charm, the way he could make anyone feel complicit in his world. But she trusted me. She said she could feel that I was not like others, that I could handle the truth. I didn't rush into dramatic action. I didn't post accusations online or confront him with a public spectacle. Instead, I began documenting meticulously, photographing receipts, messages, and evidence of deceit. I saved every screenshot, every email, every subtle clue he had left behind. It was like assembling pieces of a puzzle, each one revealing the full, ugly picture of his manipulation. And then I spoke to Daniel. That conversation was delicate, gentle, and honest. I didn't tell him every detail, not yet, but I framed it in a way he could understand. Sometimes adults make mistakes, or choices that aren't right, I said softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. But we are safe, and we can still make good choices.
We still have each other, and that's what matters." He nodded, young, eyes wide, but trusting. And in that moment, I realized that taking action wasn't just about confronting my husband, it was about protecting our life, our home, and our son's innocence. It was about reclaiming my voice so that he couldn't twist it into silence anymore. Weeks passed. I kept my routine, work at the bookstore, school runs, home life, but behind the calm exterior, I was preparing. I met with a lawyer, discreetly, learning my rights, understanding the legal protections available to me. Every meeting strengthened my resolve. I was no longer the woman gaslit into doubt and insecurity. I was a strategist, a protector, a mother, and a witness to the truth. And then came the moment I had been quietly waiting for, the chance to expose his lies to someone who mattered. Not the world at large, but peoples whose judgment and whose awareness could shift the dynamic irrevocably. Friends, colleagues, family, those who had once questioned my emotional instability, needed to see the evidence themselves. I invited them over, carefully crafting the meeting so it felt casual, not accusatory. I presented the documentation, the messages, the photographs, the careful timeline of deception. I didn't embellish. I didn't add drama. I simply showed them what was true. The reactions were what I had hoped for: shock, surprise, disbelief, and then understanding. They began to see the manipulation for what it was, rather than for the distorted version my husband had presented. And for the first time, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Validation, yes, but also clarity. People believed me. I had my voice back, and it was strong. He was in the room, quiet, and I saw him falter, not in anger, but in the realization that his carefully constructed world was cracking. He tried to speak, to explain, to twist the narrative, but no one listened. The truth had found its audience. He was exposed, and it wasn't cruel, it wasn't vindictive, it was necessary, and it was dignified. That night, when Daniel was asleep, I sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of vanilla from a candle I had lit, and I finally let myself breathe fully. I had taken action, but it hadn't consumed me. I had acted not out of revenge, but out of clarity, protection, and the quiet, unwavering demand for truth. I realized that the power I had reclaimed wasn't just over him, it was over fear, over doubt, over the years of internalized blame. Every note, every screenshot, every careful boundary I had set was a testament to my awakening, a quiet but absolute reclaiming of self.
It happened slowly, like a tide pulling back to reveal hidden rocks. Once the documentation was shared with those who mattered, friends, family, colleagues, the truth began to ripple outward. Whispers in the office, hesitant glances from neighbors, quiet conversations at family gatherings. People began connecting the dots themselves, seeing the contrast between the image he had presented and the reality I had quietly revealed. He tried, of course. At first, it was subtle. A flustered attempt to charm, a joke here, a dismissal there. "She's overreacting," he murmured to anyone who would listen. But the reactions were no longer what he had counted on. Eyes narrowed, people exchanged knowing glances, polite smiles masking disbelief. The mask he had worn for so long, perfect, controlled, untouchable, was cracking. I remember one evening my mother called, voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe he did this," she said. I thought you were overreacting. I'm so sorry, my dear." I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling both relief and sorrow. Relief because at last I was believed. Sorrow because the truth had come at such a cost. I reassured her, softly. "It's okay, Mama. I know now. That's what matters." At work, my colleagues began treating me differently. There was a newfound respect in their eyes. quiet nods of understanding when I spoke. Some of them had witnessed my husband's subtle manipulations over the years. The little undermining comments, the way I had been dismissed in meetings or casual conversations, but had assumed I was overreacting. Now, with the evidence presented clearly, they saw what I had always known. He had been a master at twisting perception, at gaslighting the people around him, and I had survived it. Even Daniel seemed to sense the shift. The tension in the house had dissipated slightly, replaced with a calm vigilance. He asked fewer questions, absorbed more smiles, and, most importantly, he saw me standing firm, unafraid, unapologetic. I could see it in the way he approached me for hugs, the quiet confidence in his small, thoughtful gestures. He was learning from my strength. The public reckoning, though, came most dramatically during a family gathering, a Sunday dinner where extended relatives had come together. My husband had arrived confident as ever, perhaps hoping that charm could sway perception. He was stopped in his tracks. My cousin, the one who had always been skeptical of my emotional nature, leaned in quietly to a group near the table, recounting the facts I had shared, as subtly and tactfully as possible. Eyes widened. Murmurs spread. People who had once regarded me with polite doubt now looked at him with careful scrutiny. He tried to respond, to deflect, but every excuse he offered was met with raised eyebrows or gentle but firm questions. People were seeing him, not the version he had crafted, but the man who had manipulated, lied, and betrayed. For the first time, he was confronted by not just one voice, but many, and they were not inclined to accept his polished falsehoods. I stayed calm through it all, quietly observing. I did not need to shout, to cry, to make drama. The truth was speaking for me. Each glance of disbelief from my relatives, each hesitant pause in his explanations, each small correction whispered among them, these were victories of a different sort. They were quiet, undeniable, and dignified. Later, after the guests had left, he retreated to the study, slamming the door in frustration. I stood in the doorway, letting him have his moment. There was no triumph in me, no gloating, just clarity, just the recognition that he had lost the narrative he had controlled for so long. "I know what you are," I said softly, my voice carrying neither anger nor pity, just the weight of truth. He did not respond. There was no defense left, no charm to mask the reality. His facade had crumbled, and the world had witnessed the fragments. The following days were filled with small acknowledgments, a relative reaching out to apologize, a friend offering quiet support, even casual neighbors giving knowing smiles when they passed me in the street. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it marked a shift. My life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but with a new foundation, one built on truth, not lies. I began to notice the freedom I had longed for. I could walk through the house without flinching at his movements. I could speak freely, without fear of judgment or dismissal. I could laugh without hesitation. Even Daniel, who had absorbed so much tension, began to relax, his energy returning in small bursts of playfulness, curiosity, and joy. There were no grand confrontations beyond that Sunday dinner, no dramatic public shaming. The consequences were subtle, slow, and absolute. His lies were no longer believable, his charm no longer persuasive. The truth had become the currency of our household, and in that truth, I found an unshakable sense of power. The most important shift, though, was internal. I no longer questioned my own feelings, my instincts, or my value. I had been silenced for years, made to feel too emotional for simply being human. Now I could feel fully, trust fully, and live fully. The world had witnessed the consequences of deceit. and I had witnessed the reclamation of my own voice.
After the initial shockwaves of exposure passed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Not the old, comfortable rhythm that had once lulled me into silence, but a rhythm of awareness, of clarity, and of hard-won peace. The house, once heavy with tension and quiet mistrust, felt lighter. Even the air seemed cleaner, infused with a sense of honesty that I had longed for, but never known until now. I started small, gently reconstructing routines that had been overshadowed by doubt and anxiety. Morning coffee on the balcony, the sun spilling gold across the wooden railing, reading to Daniel before school, letting his small, earnest questions guide my explanations of life, morality, and truth. I laughed more freely now, without the shadow of his criticisms looming in my mind. Every small joy became a statement of reclamation. Therapy helped too. I had resisted it for years, thinking I didn't need guidance, thinking I could simply calm down and get back to normal. But with a trained listener, I began untangling the knots of manipulation, recognizing patterns I had normalized, and learning to validate my own feelings. I cried through sessions, sometimes quietly, sometimes in waves, and each tear was a cleansing, a shedding of the false narratives I had carried for years. He was still there, in the house, a quiet presence, but I no longer let his words dictate my reality. When he tried to assert control, I met it with calm, reasoned boundaries. I am not overreacting. This is my decision. This is my life. And every time his arguments faltered, unarmed against the strength I had cultivated in silence and solitude. The relationship did not end immediately, nor did it resolve overnight. I wasn't looking for drama or revenge. I was looking for peace and truth. The choice to stay under one roof for practical reasons, Daniel's stability, financial arrangements, was deliberate, but it no longer felt suffocating. I had reclaimed my voice, and with it, my autonomy. Every action he took was now filtered through the lens of my awareness, and for the first time in years, I was the one in control of my own emotional landscape. Outside the house, my life flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Friends who had drifted away returned, drawn by the quiet dignity of my steadfastness. I found comfort in honest relationships, conversations that were untainted by doubt or manipulation. Even at work, colleagues treated me with renewed respect, not just for what I did, but for who I was, a woman who had endured, observed, and acted with integrity. One afternoon, Daniel asked me, eyes wide and thoughtful, "Mom, are we going to be okay now?" I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead, feeling the warmth of his small hand in mine. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be strong." That strength became the foundation for every choice I made. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always wanted to do but had postponed because there wasn't time or it was impractical. I started journaling not just events, but emotions, reflections, and lessons. I realized that life could be painful, even shocking, but that pain did not have to define me. I could observe it, understand it, and transform it into clarity. Forgiveness, too, became a complex but essential part of my healing. I am not naive. I know the depth of betrayal he committed, but holding on to bitterness would have anchored me to the past. Instead, I chose a quiet form of forgiveness, not for his sake, but for my own. To release the venom, to create space for growth, for love, for clarity. Financial independence followed too. I carefully managed accounts, learned legal strategies, and slowly disentangled our lives in ways that ensured my security and Daniel's well-being. Every document signed, every decision made became a reaffirmation of my agency. I realized I had been capable of this all along. I had simply been taught to doubt myself. Now, doubt was no longer a weapon against me. It was a compass pointing toward clarity. Over time, I began to notice the subtle joys of daily life that had been overshadowed by fear and manipulation.
The smell of freshly baked bread, the soft hum of the heater in winter, Daniel's laughter echoing through the hallway, all became small celebrations of truth, resilience, and survival. I reveled in this sensory world, in the small, concrete realities that could not be denied or twisted. And then came the most profound change, the recognition that I had become whole again. I could trust myself, trust my feelings, trust my instincts. I had been gaslighted for years that I doubted my own perception. But now, standing in the sunlight streaming through our kitchen windows, I realized that the woman who had once questioned every tear, every worry, every intuition was gone, replaced by someone steady, alert, and deeply aware of her own worth. I began mentoring friends, quietly guiding those who had faced similar betrayals, sharing what I had learned without dramatizing or overgeneralizing. I realized that strength could be gentle, wisdom could be calm, and survival did not require vengeance. Every story I shared, every lesson I passed along, became a thread in a larger tapestry of empowerment, a testament that even in the face of manipulation and betrayal, the human spirit could reclaim itself. It took months, almost a year, before I could look at him without a flicker of anxiety. By then, the tension in our home had softened into coexistence, marked by civility rather than fear. I no longer needed to measure my words, watch my expressions, or police my tears. I could exist fully in my own truth, and that freedom was intoxicating. And in the quiet moments, when Daniel was asleep and the house was still, I reflected on what I had endured and what I had learned. That resilience was born not from denying pain, but from acknowledging it. That empowerment came not from confrontation alone, but from understanding, preparation, and self-respect. That emotional strength was not about suppressing feelings, but about honoring them, trusting them, and acting from a place of clarity. I had been silenced for years. I had been made to doubt myself, my instincts, my worth. But in the aftermath, I realized something profound. I had not been broken. I had been awakening.
Sitting here now, in the quiet of my home, I often think about how easily life can twist us into shapes we don't recognize. How someone's words, "You're too emotional," can echo for years, shaping our confidence, clouding our instincts, silencing our voice. I used to carry that weight like a shadow, believing I was the problem. But now I know the truth. I was never too emotional. I was human. I was alive. I felt deeply, cared fiercely, and trusted wholly. And that is not a flaw. The journey wasn't easy. It required patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to myself and my son. There were moments of fear, moments of doubt, moments when the temptation to retreat into silence was strong. But every step I took to reclaim my voice, to document the truth, to set boundaries, to rebuild my life, that was the path to freedom. I learned that healing is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily choice to honor your feelings, trust your instincts, and protect your heart without losing your dignity. And I discovered something else. Empowerment isn't loud or vengeful. It's quiet, steady, and unwavering. It is the calm that follows a storm, the light that reveals the truth, and the courage to stand firm when the world has tried to convince you otherwise. So I ask you, have you ever been told that your feelings were too much, or that your concerns were imagined? How did you respond? Did you trust yourself, or did you let someone else define your reality? If my story resonates with you, I hope it reminds you to listen to your inner voice, to honor your emotions, and never let anyone diminish your truth. Would you like to hear more real-life stories like mine? Subscribe to support the channel and join our journey of truth, resilience, and empowerment.